where the encampment is and all of that. So chances are there will be some counter stuff too, but we'll see what happens. Is going right?
Yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي كل وقت وحين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. بسم الله الحمد لله. There's just a lot on my mind, especially with what Faisal brought up in terms of what's going on the campuses with students and so forth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them thabat, give them strength to be strong for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and for those amongst us that can support, we should try to support. Bismillah. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be talking about one of the great Sahaba. We've chosen to do this series about different young people who surrounded Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and something that should be inspirational as well as educational for us as to how do we conduct our lives as Muslims, how do we what did the Sahaba, what did they do that distinguished them from others, that the Islam that they lived manifested in their lives, and those lessons that should also be a point of reference for us in terms of how we conduct our lives. And one of the beautiful things about studying the lives of the Sahaba is that you are taking a window into the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, which is quite. If this is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the center, you have all of these vantage points, hundreds, thousands of Sahaba around him that talk about their interactions, their touch point with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, the lives of the Sahaba in some sense are one aspect of the study of the life of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. Some aspect of the seerah, touch points of the seerah, which are very beautiful. And then not only that, you see what the seerah implanted in the Sahaba and what they extracted from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thus lived the incredible lives that they did. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be talking about Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Omair, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Sayyidina Mus'ab, the name should be familiar to you all. He is an incredible figure, which we'll go through his life today, inshallah. But one of the very interesting things about Sayyidina Mus'ab is that there is not one hadith that you will ever hear that says عن مصعب أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, that we hear from Mus'ab that he relates from the Messenger of Allah. There's no hadith related by Mus'ab. There's no hadith related by Mus'ab. We don't learn about him or who he was, or hear narrations where he said, I was with the Prophet ﷺ and he did such and such. That's not the life of Sayyidina Mus'ab. And we'll find out why that is. Right? Because of when he left this world and how he left this world, he didn't pass on knowledge to us. He didn't outlive the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He died during the lifetime of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of course that's why we don't have those reports from him. Sayyidina Mus'ab radiyallahu anhu grew up in the lap of luxury. His life is very fascinating. He grew up in Mecca. He was a tremendously wealthy young man. We'll talk in a moment about where that wealth comes from. But he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, like we say. He was, as affluent as could be in the context in which he lived in. His father passed apparently when he was young, but his father left him a tremendous inheritance. His father left him a tremendous inheritance. That his mother then passed on to him. And to the point where Sayyidina Mus'ab, he would wear the most expensive clothes. He had a tailor that would come to him from Yemen to design his clothes and fashion and tailor his clothes, subhanAllah. He wore gold. Of course, back then, number one, there's no Islam. Number two, there's no haram and halal. He wore gold. Like today, people wear fat gold chains and all that. Sayyidina Mus'ab, radiallahu anhu, he would wear gold bracelets and such. He wore silk clothing, which back then is not like it is now. Silk is not nearly as readily available then as it is now. Where do you find silkworms in Arabia and so on and so forth? It comes imported, and God knows how you even get that back then. He would have like tailor-made Yemeni shoes, all of these things. Like he is decked out to the full, to the max, right? And he is known amongst the Quraysh for how he looks, how he smells. They say that the itar of Sayyidina Mus'ab, when he would leave, it would still be lingering around for a couple of days. So Mus'ab was here. He left his mark, right? He would wear the most expensive clothes, the most expensive perfume. His whole look about him was something that was, he was the trendsetter. He was the one fashioned, like people nowadays, we don't even know where trends come from, but people just follow them. He was the one who set the trends in Mecca. Young people want to be like him. Mus'ab does this, so we got to do it. Mus'ab wore this, so we got to, these new shoes, man, we got to get something like that, right? That's Mus'ab in Mecca, radiallahu anhu. But not only is he known for his style and his looks, but he's known for his intelligence. And so, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he was young, he was wealthy, and because he was intelligent, the Quraysh, they actually included him in their meetings and their gatherings and their important councils and so forth, even though he was young, in his young teens perhaps, and young to mid-teens. And so, he knew what's going on, he knows what's going on in Mecca, he understands what's happening, he's aware of, the news and so forth. Now, one of the things that, of course, happened in Mecca at that time, when Sayyidina Mus'ab was of that age, is when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gets the message. And now the message starts to spread. And now the people of Mecca start to talk, and this becomes the talk of the town. That Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has come with this message of Islam. He's telling people to leave their idols, telling them to worship one God. He's warning them about punishment in the next life, and so forth. And so, what happens is, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he hears about this. Now, just let me back up a little bit to talk a little bit more about his wealth and where it came from before we talk about how he connected with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that message came. Number one, even though Sayyidina Mus'ab was wealthy, extremely wealthy, he didn't have an air of arrogance to him. And he had a decent character, and he was intelligent. And so he had all of these interesting qualities that came together. His wealth came, as we said, from his father, who left it as an inheritance with his mother. He was his mother's only son. So she spoiled the heck out of him. She spoiled him to death. Literally, he was her whole world, right? And he had two other brothers. His mother's name was, Khunas bint Malik. And so Mus'ab was her only child, and because he had all of this wealth, and in fact, it's said that Mus'ab had two half brothers. His father had, two other brothers from another woman, two other sons from another woman. And so what happened is, he takes the largest share of the inheritance, to the point it's said that if you were to take the wealth of all of the people of Mecca and you compare that to Mus'ab's wealth, he had half of the wealth of the equivalent wealth of all of the people of Mecca. Very wealthy upbringing. That's why he lived this lifestyle when he was younger. His two brothers, just to mention something about them briefly, one of them is Mansur ibn Omair, who accepted Islam early. He made the first hijrah to Habasha, he made the hijrah to Medina, he participated in Badr and Uhud, and he died as Shaheed in Yarmouk, the Battle of Yarmouk, which took place later. His other brother, Abu Yazid ibn Umair, he didn't become Muslim until way later, almost 20 years later, during Fath Makkah. So there's a lot of difference that was there amongst the brothers. And he was interesting, and we'll come across this later. Abu Yazid, Umair's half brother, he was captured in the Battle of Badr. He was on the side of the Kuffar, and he was captured. We'll talk about that later, inshallah. So when there's this buzz in Mecca about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the message that he's brought, everybody knows him, of course, as As-Sadiq al-Amin, the trustworthy and the truthful. And Mus'ab ibn Umair, he's curious. He wants to know, he wants to hear from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly as to what this message is. And so, of course, as you know, the early Muslims, they would go and they would sit with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in secret in the house of Al-Arqam, right? Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam, the interesting name, right? His name is Al-Arqam, the son of the father of Al-Arqam, right? And so they used to have these secret study circles with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Mus'ab, he goes there. And he goes, he goes there in secret so that nobody will know. And that's what the Muslims used to do. And it appears that he walked in while the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching the Sahaba. He's giving them a dars. And when Mus'ab comes, they're all of their attention is turned to him because he's Mus'ab. Everybody knows him. Everybody knows him as this young, extremely fashionable, extremely, stylish young man. And when Mus'ab comes in, he sits, he hears the words of the Prophet ﷺ, he asks him a few questions, and he's amazed by the Quran, and he takes there his shahada. The Quran moved his heart, and he takes on the spot, the first time he hears the message, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so, this was an incredible moment for the people of Mecca. Because why? Who is sitting there who is sitting with Rasulullah when Mus'ab comes in? Mus'ab is this young, rich man. Who's sitting with the Prophet? It's the slaves, it's the oppressed, it's the weak, those who don't have a tribal affiliation, right? That's the majority of the Prophet's followers in the very beginning. Maybe 10, 15, 20, however many Muslims are there. And there's no Umar radiallahu anhu, there's no Hamza radiallahu anhu. These things didn't happen yet. Hamza Mus'ab became Muslim very early on. And so, Mus'ab, he is advised by the Prophet ﷺ to keep his Islam secret. And so, just a couple of things here. Number one, that Mus'ab was very instantaneously transformed from this person who was, who lived in this lavish lifestyle, and now all of that attention of his goes to the service of Islam. And we're going to see what a tremendous impact the fact that he was who he was, and he could have been whoever he wanted to be, and he became who he became, what that looks like. It's fascinating when you see the life of Sayyidina Mus'ab. Today celebrities, they become Muslim. And Muslims, everybody's excited, oh, did you hear such and such became Muslim? Alhamdulillah, that's a good and beautiful thing. But the celebrity status of Mus'ab and what it actually meant for Islam was very meaningful, much more so than any basketball player, entertainer, whatever it is, famous person that becomes Muslim now, and then what becomes, and then what sits in the hearts of people. The way that happened with Mus'ab, much different than what we see now. And so, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he accepts Islam, he keeps his Islam private, he goes home. He doesn't tell his mother. Why? Because his mother is a very tenacious woman, strong woman, woman who smothered her child, right? Spoiled him, and she's one of her people, idol worshiper, and the whole nine. So he keeps that to himself. He continues to go to sit with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Al-Arqam, until one day he's found out, he's noticed. There were spies, if you want to call them. There were people who were the surveillance, the big brother that was there in Mecca, looking to see what Muslims are doing. Or looking to find signs of people's Islam so they can expose them, right? Just like they are now. We see in all of the protests, the support of our Palestinian brothers and sisters, which is so sad that today people have to go and cover their faces when you go and protest for Palestine. Why? Because of the surveillance mechanisms that are there. Sayyidina Mus'ab, he lived in a time in Mecca when there was some similar element, I should say, not the same. And so anyways, this man by the name of Uthman ibn Talha, who later became Muslim, much later in Fath Mecca, at that time he's kafir, he sees Mus'ab sneaking to Dar al-Arqam. And then later he sees Mus'ab praying with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they sometimes would here and there. And so he tells the Quraysh. Uthman ibn Talha, by the way, he is from Bani Abdiddar, and he was the one the Prophet ﷺ gave him the keys of the Kaaba, because they were always the keepers of the keys of the Kaaba. So he had some, this prominence in that regard. But anyways, at that time, he tells the leaders of Quraysh, the word finally gets to his mother. And like we said, that surveillance mechanism, the agents of Batil, they're always looking to stifle the da'wah. He was that mechanism at that time. We have a different mechanism today. That will always be there, right? يَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. They do everything they can to stop, to block the call of Islam. يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. They want to put out, to extinguish the light of Islam with their words, with what they say. That will always be there. So he gets found out. His mother finds out. And she confronts him. in full confidence, he acknowledges, yes, I have become Muslim. And then he immediately, this is fascinating, he recites to his mother from the Quran. And this is one of the things that you find always with Mus'ab. Him and the Quran and the relationship was an incredible relationship. He was somebody who loved the Quran, and people loved to hear the Quran from him. He had a beautiful voice. And he was, he was a lifelong student of the Quran. And so he recites some Quran to his mother on the spot, and hoping that it will have some effect. His mother listens to him, and she became more upset, and to the point where she pulled back her hand to hit him, because she's so infuriated now. But this is a mother, remember, she doted on her son her whole life. She spoiled him, she looked over him this way. She couldn't bring herself, she never hit him before. She doesn't know how to do that, but she's so, so upset. And she can't bring herself to do that. And it was actually her love that restrains her in that moment. So what she does is perhaps something worse. She takes Mus'ab and she basically imprisons him in her own house, makes a quasi-dungeon in her house, and shackles him in one of the corners of her house, and she has people oversee him. She doesn't have him publicly beaten. And perhaps, there's an interesting, sort of reflection on that. Why doesn't that happen? Because if she makes a scene out of Mus'ab becoming Muslim in Mecca, like there was with the poor and the weak and the vulnerable in Mecca, Mus'ab, remember, he's a trendsetter. People look to him. They say, oh, this guy became Muslim? Oh, wow. That might open up eyes. So she hides him in the house. And so what happens is she binds him up at home. He becomes a prisoner in his own home. And Mus'ab, radiallahu anhu, he doesn't waver, he doesn't flinch, he continues reading the Quran to himself. Perhaps he's heard now. Imagine him at home and he's reading the Quran in his beautiful voice, and he's probably strengthened by the fact that he knows other people in Mecca are also being tortured, humiliated, even killed because of their adherence to Islam, and so that emboldens him, gives him some strength. But the thing you have to realize about Mus'ab that makes him special, that differentiates him from everybody else, who was being tortured in Mecca? The weak, the oppressed, the slaves, so to speak, the nobodies from a societal standpoint. These people are mountains with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in society's eyes, Kafir society's eyes, they're nobody. Mus'ab is somebody. He's a big personality of his generation. And so his pain is different than everybody else. Those people are used to a life of not much. But Mus'ab, he lived in the lap of luxury, and now he's restrained, fully in solitary confinement, right? And so he's lived in a life of luxury. Now that's all taken away from him. He's lived a life of privilege. You would think that he would break, because maybe he was soft because he had all of this luxury. But Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu was strong. And he hears that there is a group of people that are going to, even though he's in prison, he hears that there is a group of Muslims that are going to make hijrah to Abyssinia, to Habasha. So he joins. Radiallahu anhu. He escapes at his first opportunity. The guards are not watching, perhaps they're sleeping, his mother is not there. He escapes and he joins this group that goes to Habasha. They cross the Red Sea. And they go and live in this land where there's peace and security under the king Najash. right? That gives them the Prophet ﷺ described him as a fair person, as a just ruler. And so he settles. And he settles in Abyssinia, and at some point, it seems like in Abyssinia or shortly thereafter, he gets married to Hamna bint Jahsh. She is the sister of Zainab bint Jahsh, who is later on one of the wives, marries the Prophet ﷺ, right? And so in other words, Hamda, his wife, becomes the future sister-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although he never saw those times because that happened later. And so there's a report that comes that the situation of the Muslims in Mecca has improved, and so after some time, when that report comes, Mus'ab and some of the other Muslims, they go back to Mecca. They don't go to Abyssinia with, their hearts like fully open and their souls. Why? Why is it that they don't go to Abyssinia when the first Muslims, they go Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu and the rest? Why did they go to Abyssinia? They had to go. There was persecution. They wanted to be able to practice their religion in freedom. But they didn't go with 100% willingness. What was the one thing that's still there in Mecca? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why would they want to leave this island? No way. Their hearts, they're still longing to be with him. The Quran is being actively revealed. They don't want to miss that. But the situation is such that they feel safer there, and some of them, they had to for their own lives perhaps. And so Mus'ab, he returns to Mecca, longing to be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It turns out the report was false. The situation for Muslims was not better. And so Mus'ab, once again, he goes back to Habasha. And when Mus'ab, he comes back to Mecca again, because again, he longs to be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now the second time coming back, his mother makes one last attempt to gain control of him, to have authority over him. She tries to convince him to leave this religion. And she threatens Mus'ab and says that I'm going to imprison you again, and I'm going to take all of your wealth away. You'll never have access to again. And what's really interesting is that when he goes back the second time, he goes to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam first before he goes to see his own mother. That's the love, right? And she asks him, she says, you went to go see him before you come to see me? And he says these beautiful words. He says, حُبُّ مُحَمَّدٍ أَمَّاهُ أَعْظَمُ مِنْ حُبِّكَ. He says, oh my mother, the love of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more than the love for you. SubhanAllah. Look at that. Look at that. The love that, she smothered him with has nothing. You gave birth to me, mother. You brought me out of your womb into this world, but he brought me out of darkness into light. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that's the difference. And so she threatens to imprison him again. He says, if you do it, I will kill anyone who tries to put their hands on me. And so his mother realizes that he's serious, and he leaves. And that was separation, and that's the last time he sees his mother. His mother died on kufr. SubhanAllah, I mean, you see people who, the words, our love for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we say with our tongue. There are certain things that we can practice in our actions, but the Sahaba, the way they showed it, that's why we love them. That's why we love them. because the way in which their love for Rasulullah displayed, manifested in their lives. And so, she disavows him, and he leaves. And even in that moment, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he calls for his mother. Be Muslim. My mother, I advise you sincerely, I'm concerned with you. Take your shahada. And she says, I swear by the shooting stars, by these other false things, I shall not enter your religion, even if my opinion is ridiculed and my mind becomes useless, if I become, senile or whatever it is. Mus'ab leaves all of the luxuries that he ever had access to. That life is gone. It's been gone, and now the door is shut, sealed shut. He has nothing to do with his mother, he has nothing to do with his family legacy, inheritance, anything like that. This incredibly, elegant, well-dressed young man who had all of these things, he leaves all of that, and now he lives a life of pure struggle. His clothes are coarse. His food, one day maybe he has something to eat, and one day maybe he doesn't. He now has more important concerns. His life is focused now on spreading the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, learning and spreading the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What an incredible, lesson for us to take. What do we place most value on, right? What is most important for us in our life? And several years later, Mus'ab radiallahu anhu, we came into a gathering of the Muslims, of the Sahaba, they're sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, and when they see Mus'ab come, listen to this. Their heads go down like almost in sorrow. They see Mus'ab, he comes in. Their heads go down in sorrow. Some of them are moved to tears. The reason why is because his clothes are all tattered. Materially, he looks like in horrible shape. They know who he used to be. They know who he used to be. And now they see him like this, all raggedy, and in this sort of condition. And the Prophet and they respect Sayyidina Mus'ab for what he used to. They respect him because they know who he used to be. They know his sacrifice. It's clearly visible. They saw him as this young man who lived all lavish and everything, and now they see him and he has nothing. And he could have stayed on that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he comments, he says, لَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ مُصْعَبًا هَذَا وَمَا بِمَكَّةَ فَتَى أَنْعَمُ عِنْدَ أَبَوَيْهِ مِنْهُ ثُمَّ تَرَكَ ذَلِكَ كُلَّهُ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. He says, I saw Mus'ab, this Mus'ab that you see in front of you, and there was nobody in Mecca, there was no young person in Mecca that had more wealth, more blessings that were visible upon him, that his parents showered upon him than Mus'ab. Nobody. This is the shahada of Rasulullah. And he says, then he left all of that because of his love of Allah and his Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli wa sallam. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he continues and he says, there will come a time when Allah will grant you victory over Persia and Rome. The Prophet, he was a master teacher. He would use circumstances to teach the Muslims lessons. He saw Mus'ab's condition, and then he talks about something else. He says, there will come a time when Allah will grant you victory over Persia and Rome. He's telling the Muslims, you would have one dress in the morning and another in the evening. And you would eat out of one dish in the morning and another in the evening. Meaning, Mus'ab, he only has this one set of clothes. They're all tattered. He's in this wretched state. There will come a time when you will defeat the Romans, you will defeat the Persians, and you will have wealth. You'll wear some clothes in the morning and some clothes at night. You'll eat in nice dishes in the morning and then eat in another dish at night. They didn't live that at that time. And so the Prophet ﷺ predicts and says, you will become rich and powerful. And they say, Ya Rasulullah, are we in a better situation in these times, right now? Or will we be better off then, when we have all of these riches and so forth? And the Prophet ﷺ, he responds and he says, you are better off now than you will be then. And he says, if you knew of the world what I know, you would certainly not be so much concerned. You would not be so concerned with it. SubhanAllah. Look at our condition today. And look what we have. And look how much we take it for granted. And look how much we have. And SubhanAllah, you know, the Prophet says, you would have been better off back then. There's not much. And that's enough for you. Your life is simple. You're focused on love of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yes, SubhanAllah. Sayyidina Mus'ab radiyallahu anhu, he is with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam now in Mecca, and it's later in the period of Mecca. And one day, 6 young people from the city of Yathrib, they come to Mecca. This is during Hajj season, and when it was Hajj, there was Hajj before Islam. It's a remnant of the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so the Arab, they would come, the different Arab tribes and people, they would come to Mecca during the Hajj season. And when these people would come, the Prophet ﷺ would go out to them and make da'wah, see if there's anybody. The Prophet ﷺ, he went to Ta'if, they rejected him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He would go to Hajj and preach the message. This year, in the 10th or 11th year, there was a young group of about 6 young men from Medina. That wasn't yet Medina, it's called Yathrib. And they came, the Prophet ﷺ spoke to them, they accepted the message. And they say to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they say, أرسل معنا من يعلم أقوامنا. They say, send with us, O Messenger of Allah, someone that will teach our people. And Mus'ab is there with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The Prophet says, go. And so Sayyidina Mus'ab at that moment in time, his life changes, and he becomes now the first ever ambassador of Islam. Right? And that's what we all know Mus'ab as, right? The first ambassador of Islam, who the Prophet ﷺ, he sent to Medina, which was not yet Medina, to teach the people of that place Islam. And so Mus'ab, he is chosen above the other Sahaba that are older, that have more experience, that are more closely related to the Prophet ﷺ, that have a greater status than him. And he's chosen why? Because of his character, because of his refined mannerisms, right? And because of his sharp intellect, and because of knowledge of the Quran. He has all of these beautiful qualities, which are important qualities of the da'iyah, of the one that's calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone that's calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they should be attractive to the people that they're calling to. And Sayyidina Mus'ab, the Prophet ﷺ sees in him all of those qualities. And so at this point, and these people that came from Medina, they're in their 20s or so. One of the things that's important to recognize about Yathrib at that time, before it became Medina, is that there was a constant warfare between the two tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, right? The Aus and the Khazraj, the two tribes of Yathrib. And many of their senior figures were killed in the recent years, in those battles, in those skirmishes. And so now the leadership was younger. So these people that came, they were approximately in their 20s. Sayyidina Mus'ab is in his 20s. And he goes with them now as a teacher. He goes back to Medina. He goes to Medina as a guest of a man who had recently become Muslim, Mus'ab ibn Zurara, whose life itself is worth studying. He's from the Khazraj tribe. And Mus'ab ibn Zurara, he would take Sayyidina Mus'ab and he would take him to different gatherings. He would open up the doors basically for him to be able to give da'wah to the people of Yathrib. He became, this sort of the right-hand man of Mus'ab. And he knows his people. He knows the people of Yathrib. Mus'ab doesn't. So he gives him access to all of these different parts of Yathrib. And so he gives him, he helps open up the road for da'wah. Now, this is where the brilliance of Sayyidina Mus'ab comes, and you see how quickly Medina is transformed. So once Sayyidina Mus'ab and As'ad, they are sitting near a well in the orchard. Remember, Yathrib at that time is all date orchards, right? All of these palm trees, and they would grow dates in the orchard of one of the clans there. And there were a number of new Muslims that were sitting there. There were others who were interested in Islam. And one of the powerful people of Yathrib comes. And his name is Usayd ibn Hudayr. Usayd ibn Hudayr, As'ad, he warns Mus'ab that this is one of the chiefs of the chief of Medina. Be conscious of what you say to him, right? And this man comes, Usayd, and he's carrying his spear, and he looks visibly upset. He's coming with a heavy sort of presence. He's angry, and Mus'ab is ready to receive him. Usayd, he starts threatening Mus'ab. He says, "Why have you come to us to corrupt the weak amongst us?" He sees that he's having an influence over the people. And he says, "If you want to stay alive, get away from us. Stay away from us." And Mus'ab, he melts his heart with a smile. This man, he comes with all of this anger, and Mus'ab, he remains calm, and he melts him down with his smile. He disarms him with his kindness. And he says, "Won't you sit down and listen? If you are pleased and satisfied with what we have to say, you can accept it. If you dislike it, we'll stop teaching and preaching to you and we'll leave." And Usayd, he says, "Unsoft." He says, "That's reasonable, that's fair." He automatically brought his temperature down. Right? SubhanAllah, what a beautiful, important skill to have for the da'i. And so Mus'ab, he's not compelling him to do anything. He's just opening up a pathway where he can pass the message on. An important lesson for us. And so he tells him about Islam. He recites to him the Quran. And that's why, by the way, even until today, even with people who don't understand the Quran, recite to them the Quran. And recite it with your beautiful voice. Whenever we have people come to the masjid, or even if we talk to people outside, recite to them. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to recite the Quran, as it has an effect. It's powerful, right? They don't understand. They're not Arabs. Like, these people are Arabs. It affected them to their core. But here, just hearing it is extremely effective in just bringing calm, let alone with being able to change the heart. And so Mus'ab, he starts telling this chief of this tribe of the people of Yathrib, he says, he recites the Quran, and now Usayd, he responds and he said, "Ma ahsan hada al-qawl wa asdaqa." He says, how beautiful this speech is and how true it is. And he says, what does a person have to do to become Muslim? How do I enter this, what you have? And he says, go take a bath, purify yourself, change your clothes, and come. A few minutes pass, the man, he comes and says, to the point where he's just still dripping with the water from the bath, that he was so eager. And he takes his shahada. And Usayd, he takes his shahada, and immediately, he says to Mus'ab, he says, after me, there is a man who, if he follows you, every one of his people will follow you. And I'm going to send him to you now. I'm going to bring him to you now. His name is Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. So subhanAllah, look, a few minutes ago, he's threatening Mus'ab. Get out of here or we're going to kill you. A few minutes later, he's a da'iyah. He's calling people to Islam himself. Right? So look how fast the heart changed. Look how the effect that Sayyidina Mus'ab had on people. And so he calls Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. And Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he comes and he listens to Mus'ab. And he's convinced and he's satisfied. And he says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then they say there's another man, another chief of the people of Yathrib. His name is Sa'd ibn Ubadah. We're going to bring him to you and speak to him. They bring him. Sa'd ibn Ubadah sits with them, and he hears Sayyidina Mus'ab recite the Quran. Says, in a matter of probably, we don't know the exact time, maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he has 3 chiefs of the people of Mecca take their shahada. And then the people start talking, and they say, if Usayd ibn Khudayr, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, by the way, the one who what? The Arsh al-Rahman, it shook at his death. He became a great figure himself. Sa'd ibn Ubadah, these 3 have accepted this new religion. How can we not follow? That's the leadership. How can we not follow? Let's go to Mus'ab and also accept this message. They say that the truth comes from his lips. And so, it's said in that night, dozens and dozens of people, if not hundreds of people, became Muslim. In that span of a few hours, Yathrib is transformed, absolutely transformed. By the brilliance of Sayyidina Sa'd, by the brilliance of Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Omair, radiyallahu anhu. SubhanAllah, Mus'ab, there's not one hadith that's related for him. And so we get cut off to some of that knowledge of what happened on that day, what that day looked like, his perspective, right? And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be able to sit with Sayyidina Mus'ab in Jannah and to help and to relate to us and to be able to witness and see what happened on that day. What an incredible day that must have been. Inshallah, we'll take the comments and questions towards the end if you all don't mind. And so, Mus'ab ibn Umair, this first ambassador of the Prophet ﷺ, is extremely successful in his da'wah, right? Extremely successful. And by the way, Sa'd ibn Ubadah, he calls his people, when all of the people, they say, we're going to go see Mus'ab, what's going on here? He calls his people. He says, "O people of Yathrib, I've become Muslim and I believe in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you don't believe the way I do in one God and you reject your idols, then do not ask anything of me. I don't know you, you don't know me." Says, all the tribal alliances are broken. There is no marriage between us, there's no contracts between us, that's it. In other words, I become Muslim now, you can follow my way, or I'm done with you. That's how he calls them. He has that sort of authority amongst them. And then, of course, they all accept the message. And so again, by nightfall, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people accept Islam, subhanAllah. So the pathway for Hijrah is completely being paved open now. And so, remember Mus'ab ibn Umair, he went to Medina, or to Yathrib, in the Hajj season. A year later, in the next Hajj season, Mus'ab ibn Umair, he goes to Mecca. It's been a year since he's seen Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now he goes to Mecca with 70 people from the Ansar. 70 people from the Ansar. And they go to take al-bay'ah, the oath, the pledge with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, bay'at al-aqaba, as it's called. And so they make this pledge. It also called bay'at al-harb. That they commit their lives to the cause, and they commit to defend the Prophet ﷺ at all costs. In other words, the pathway to Medina being opened up is being paved, right? And shortly thereafter, the Prophet ﷺ, he gets the permission to make hijrah. He starts sending all of the Muslims to Yathrib, especially those amongst the Muslims that are being persecuted. Now there's a safe place for them to go to, because now hundreds of Muslims in Yathrib, in this land, ready to accept Islam, ready to receive the Prophet ﷺ, wanting to see the beautiful light of Rasulullah ﷺ and experience it for their own selves. If this is the messenger of Allah ﷺ, what about the messenger himself? If Mus'ab ibn Umair had this effect on them, then what about Rasulullah ﷺ, the messenger himself? Right? So they start to flood into Medina. And by the way, after Mus'ab ibn Umair, the next person that's sent to Medina to go as a teacher, anybody know who that is? Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the blind man in whose regard was revealed Abasa wa Tawalla, and Ja'ahul A'ma, the blind man that came to the Messenger of Allah, and who was the mu'adhin of the Prophet as well. He went also as a teacher, and he also recited the Quran beautifully, and they would go and call the people of Yathrib to Islam. And so Mus'ab, and now the Muslims start to come into Medina until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he arrives in now it's called Madinatul Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the city of the Prophet, right? And Madinatul Munawwara, the enlightened city. It's enlightened, why? Because of the light, the nur of Rasulullah sallallahu. And so Mus'ab was incredibly successful in his da'wah. Incredibly successful in his da'wah. Mus'ab is the Imam of Medina in some sense, right? Prior to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ coming. They loved Sayyidina Mus'ab. On his hands they became Muslim. The people of Mecca, they knew who Mus'ab was too. They have love for Mus'ab too. The Muhajirin, they love Sayyidina Mus'ab. He's such an important figure, right? Who they are, who he is in the minds of people, in the hearts of the Muslims, the Muhajirin and the Ansar. He has a status. And he's a young man. Now in his probably in his late 20s or so, maybe approaching 30 by the time he arrives to, or by the time the Prophet arrives to Medina. SubhanAllah, this is his special place. This is his special place amongst the Sahaba. And so, of course, the most important event that takes place in Salat al-Isha is 9:30. So I don't really have a time sort of, cut off. So I'll go to when I go. That's how we'll do these Mondays, inshallah. So what happens? The Battle of Badr. The Battle of Badr. Yawm al-Taqal Jam'an, Yawm al-Furqan, right? The day when the two forces met, the day of reckoning, the day of when matters are decided, right? The struggle between Iman and Kufr now comes to a clash in a way that it never did before. Who is given the responsibility of carrying the flag on that day? Sayyidina Mus'ab, radiallahu anhu, which is an important, we mentioned last week, Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, was the one who was carrying the flag on the day of Khaybar and in other battles as well. Here, Mus'ab is given that important task in the Battle of Badr. Because the person that carries a flag, they're like a rallying point. If the flag is up, we're strong in battle. And the person that's holding the flag is representative of that. And they need to have that energy, that spirit, that they need to be a personality that carries authority as well. And Sayyidina Mus'ab is the one the Prophet is given that task. And of course, the Muslims have a tremendous victory on that day. Now what happens? Something interesting happens in the battle of Badr. And that is that the brother of Sayyidina Omair is captured. Abu Yazid ibn Omair. The brother of Mus'ab. Brother of Mus'ab ibn Umair, Abu Yazid ibn Umair, his half-brother. Remember, he's the only child of his mother, but he has two half-brothers. Abu Yazid is on the side of the Quraysh, he's captured. The Prophet ﷺ, he instructs the Muslims to treat the prisoners well. And he himself, Abu Yazid, he narrates and he says, I was among a group of Ansar. And he says, whenever they had lunch or dinner, they would give me bread and dates to eat in obedience to the Prophet's instructions to treat us well. The prisoner himself, right, was caught, the brother of Mus'ab, he's saying, they gave me food, they took care of me. And he says, my brother Mus'ab passed by me, and he said to the man from the Ansar who was holding me prisoner, he says, tie him firmly. Mus'ab says to the other Ansari man about his own brother, he says, tie him firmly. His mother is a woman of great wealth, and maybe she would ransom him for you. We get some money out of this. Mus'ab says, tie him firmly. He's talking about his own brother. And Abu Yazid, he's shocked. My brother is saying that about me? He said, my brother, that's your instructions concerning me? And listen to the response of Sayyidina Mus'ab. He says, he is my brother, not you. The one that's holding him prisoner, he is my brother, my true brother. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. My true brother is my mu'min brother, my brother in iman, in faith, right? And so subhanAllah, he takes this position, showing how he sees the world now. This is his world view. He left everything. He left everything in Mecca. He gave everything to the message of Islam. He left the dunya, he gave everything to the deen. That's how you understand Mus'ab. You want to understand Mus'ab? He left the dunya, he gave everything to the deen. To the point he's now, by the way, he's also one of his names, they call him Mus'ab al-Khayr. Mus'ab al-Khayr. Mus'ab. Yeah, he's the representation of good. And not too long, maybe a year or so later, the next major event in the history of post-Hijrah is what? The Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud. The Muslims make preparations. The Prophet ﷺ gives the important task of holding the flag again to Sayyidina Mus'ab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And as you know, in the Battle of Uhud, what happened? The Muslims at first, they make an incredible advance against the kuffar. The archers are stationed on the small mountain that's next to Jabal Uhud. It's more of a hill than it is a mountain, really. About 50 archers. And the Prophet says, even if you see the birds eating from their heads, meaning the enemy is completely defeated and routed, don't leave your post until the instruction comes, until the command comes. They see the Muslims go to start collecting the ghanima, right? The spoils of war, because the first contingent of kuffar that came, they defeated them. And they say they're taking, the ghanima and we're missing out and we have to get our share. And they start, they have an, some of them, they rebuke them. They say, no, the Prophet ﷺ told us to stay here and not to leave under any circumstances. And the others say, but then battle's over, look. And so they go and they rush to the battlefield. And let's pause here for a minute and look at the difference between Mus'ab ibn Omair and these people. Mus'ab ibn Omair left the dunya, left everything, could care less about any material thing. These people whose iman is very, very fresh, very new, not deep rooted, they run at the first sign of taking something from the dunya. And that's not and Allah knows our state. Allah knows our state, how flimsy it may be. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us firm iman like Sayyidina Mus'ab. They go to take part in capturing some of the spoils of war, and what happens? Who comes from the side of the kuffar? Who advances? Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid radiyallahu anhu. At that time he's kafir. He's the head of the cavalry, of the Quraysh that are on horses. He was waiting. He sees that the archers have left their post. Imagine 50 archers on the mountain. That's a lot of arrows that's coming at you. 40 of them have left. There's only 10 left on the mountain. He sees an opportunity. He sees an opening. He comes around the back side of the mountain. This is helpful to see. This is what happens. This is Jabal Uhud. This is the small mountain, what is now called Jabal Omair, right? Where the archers are stationed. This is where the archers are stationed. The Muslims are here. This is the Muslims. With Uhud kind of at their back. The kuffar are here. The Muslims make the first advance. The kuffar, they fall. The archers, they leave their post. Sayyidina Khalid is back here somewhere. And he comes from the back. So the Muslims had went in there starting to go after the spoil. And Sayyidina Khalid comes from the back and he just causes chaos amongst the Muslims. And so, when that happens, when Khalid ibn Walid launches his counterattack, the Prophet ﷺ is completely exposed because the archers left their post. And Sayyidina Mus'ab, radiallahu anhu, he realized what's happening. He sees the danger the Prophet ﷺ is in. He has the flag. Remember, the flag is the rallying point. And he goes and he starts yelling, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And he starts waving the flag around. And to divert, and he goes away from the Prophet ﷺ, so that the kuffar will come towards him. And by the way, Sayyidina Mus'ab, he resembled the Prophet ﷺ. He was extremely handsome. Extremely handsome. And he had a resemblance to the Prophet ﷺ. And so he goes to divert them. And some of them, they go after him. To the point, and Sayyidina Mus'ab, again, he didn't, like these people, the archers, they go after the spoils of war. Sayyidina Mus'ab, his only concern is what? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Completely different, divergent sort of realities. So he goes and they start to launch an attack on him. There was a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Qami'ah. He is the same man who dealt a blow to the Prophet ﷺ on his face to the point where his helmet, the chain mail, the metal hook went into the blessed cheek of the Prophet ﷺ. It's the same kafir that now is attacking Sayyidina Mus'ab. Sayyidina Mus'ab is holding the flag, and this man comes to him and he takes his sword and he cuts off the right arm of Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu. The flag drops. I don't know how to understand this. Wallahi, I don't know how to understand it. Because, how do you understand it? He cuts off his arm. If I get poked by a splinter, I'm diverted in pain. I don't know how to understand. Your arm is cut off and you're still conscious. And you still know what you're doing. And you're still focused on protecting Rasulullah ﷺ. How do you understand that? I don't know. The flag drops. He picks up the flag, Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu, with his left arm, his left hand. And he's still conscious, still diverting attention from Rasulullah ﷺ. And the man that same man comes and he cuts off the left arm of Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Sayyidina Mus'ab, I don't know how to understand it. He picks up the flag with the remainder of his arms, however much is there. In defense of the Prophet ﷺ, he knows exactly what he's doing. His goal is so focused, right? I'm not talking about his goal at this moment in time, but the goal his whole lifetime. He knows exactly what he's doing in Yathrib. He knows why he's there. He knows his purpose in life. He left the dunya full scale, wholesale, and now he's focused on the immediate task at hand, protecting the Messenger of Allah until he has the consciousness to pick up the flag, and he's in the state he's in. And he's saying, and Sayyidina Mus'ab, he's saying to rally the Muslims, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبَلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. He's saying, and he says it each time his arm is being cut, and Muhammad is only a messenger. And there were other messengers away that passed before him, because it's being said now that Muhammad was killed, and so he's trying to make sure that the Muslims are still conscious. If Muhammad was killed, which is not true, but if it was, he is only a messenger, and other messengers before him have passed. If he dies, are you going to run away and scatter away? Still fight. He's calling the Muslims, right? Still continue to fight. However deep the attachment of Sayyidina Mus'ab is to Rasulullah sallallahu, his attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more. And he's fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Sayyidina Mus'ab, they take a spear and they strike it through him until he dies as a shaheed. Radiallahu ta'ala. The flag falls. Later, these words of Sayyidina Mus'ab come as Quran. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبَلِهِ الرُّسُلُ, until the end of the ayat. And subhanAllah, this happened in different circumstances where the Sahaba, they would say some words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like that's how deep their their mind and their thought was, that the words were reflected in the Quran, right? That's how something would be revealed, and one of the Sahaba would say, Tabarakallahu ahsanul khaliqeen. Blessed is Allah, how great of a creator He is. And the Quran came, and there were Sayyidina Umar has a few instances of that as well. Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu, he gave his life for Islam, for Allah, for his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After the battle, they're going through, and the Muslims, that was a very difficult day. 70 Sahaba were killed. The forefront of them, Sayyidina Hamza and Sayyidina Mus'ab. Sayyidina Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. And they go to the battlefield. When they come to Sayyidina Mus'ab's body, the Sahaba are in tears. Again, they had tremendous love for him and tremendous respect for him. Sayyidina Khabbab ibn al-Arat, he says that when they found him, they could not find any cloth to shroud his body except his own garment. In his body, which they found 70 different wounds on, subhanAllah. Let alone that his arms are cut off, and subhanAllah. They take this one garment. When they cover his head, his legs are exposed. When they cover his legs, his head are exposed. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, take the garment and cover his head and cover his feet with this plant. It's called al-adkhir or al-idkhir, some sort of plant that's there. Cover his feet and take whatever you can to just cover him up. The Prophet ﷺ, when he goes and he sees Sayyidina Hamza on the battlefield martyred, they hear the Prophet ﷺ cry in such a way that they never heard him cry before. Subhanallah. Yeah, he's Rasulullah ﷺ. He knows the message, he knows the truth, but he's deeply attached to people that stood by him. Tremendous loyalty of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is his uncle who stood by him. And they hear him cry in a way they never heard him cry before, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. His body is horribly mutilated as well. But then the Prophet ﷺ, he comes to Sayyidina Mus'ab, and he also, with great emotion, he remembers Sayyidina Mus'ab, who he was. That's the image in the mind of the Prophet ﷺ, who Sayyidina Mus'ab was. He was this young man who had everything, had the whole dunya, stylish and all of these things, and now he sees that there's not enough cloth to even cover his body. And that's how he had been living for years. And the Prophet ﷺ, he recites the verse, من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. That from amongst the believers there are men that held firm, that completely fulfilled the trust, the oath that they made with Allah. And he says that in regards to Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لَقَدْ رَأَيْتُكَ بِمَكَّةِ. He's talking to Sayyidina Mus'ab, his body. He says, I saw you in Mecca, وَمَا بِهَا أَرَقُ حُلَّةً. And the beautiful dress that you used to wear, وَلَا أَحْسَنَ لِبَّةً مِنْكِ. And there was nobody that had that beautiful appearance that you had. ثُمَّ هَا أَنْتَ ذَا شَاعِثُ الرَّأْسِ فِي بُرْدَةٍ. And now I see you and you're in this disheveled state and you're wearing this short. The Prophet ﷺ is eulogizing Sayyidina Mus'ab radiallahu anhu, remembering who he was, acknowledging the incredible sacrifices that he made for Islam that led to his shahada, that led to his dying fi sabilillah. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says these words. He says, إِنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ يَشْهَدُ أَنَّكُمُ الشُّهَدَاءُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. He says, indeed, the messenger of Allah, he's speaking about himself in the third person, bears witness that you are shuhada with Allah on the day of judgment. The Prophet ﷺ bears witness to their shahada, that they are indeed shuhada, to the full extent. Yeah, and then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ زُورُوهُمْ وَأْتُوهُمْ وَسَلِّمُوا عَلَيْهِمْ. He tells the people, he says, O people, he says, visit them and come to them and give them salam. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says that anybody who gives salam to them, they will respond to their salam until the day of judgment. Subhanallah, subhanallah, that the shuhada, and that day, that place in Mecca, that area is still called what? Shuhada. The area, like this is Canoa Park, that area is called Shuhada. SubhanAllah. After the martyrs of, and so that's why we should go there. That's why we go there. It's the Prophet ﷺ, shortly before his death, he went to go visit the Shuhada in Uhud. His uncle, Sayyidina Hamza, Sayyidina Mus'ab. He had a tremendous attachment to that place, to the point shortly before his death he goes to visit. And so that is, you know, we should have that longing to go there and to give our salam to Sayyidina Mus'ab, to give our salam to Sayyidina Hamza, who will respond to us in their graves. And subhanAllah, just a couple of last points and a couple of last notes, when the Prophet ﷺ, he goes back to to Medina, the women are waiting to hear or to see their men coming back, or to see if they're what happened. And the Prophet ﷺ, Hamna, the wife of Sayyidina Mus'ab, comes to him. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says to her, Ya Hamna, احتسبي أخاك عبد الله ibn Jahsh. Says, Ya Hamna, he's talking to the wife of Sayyidina Mus'ab. احتسبي, meaning seek your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your brother Abdullah ibn Jahsh. Her brother died in Uhud, shaheed. And he starts by telling her, seek reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And she says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, Ya Hamna, ihtasibi khalaka Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. She's also related to Sayyidina Hamza. Remember, she's the sister of Zaynab bint Jahsh, who was also the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And so he's saying, take account of your uncle. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward for the passing of your uncle, Hamza. She says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And then the Prophet says, Ya Hamna, ihtasibi zawjaka Mus'ab ibn Omair. Says, O Hamna, ask reward for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the passing of your husband, Mus'ab. And her emotions come pouring out. And her emotions come pouring out. And the Prophet ﷺ cries when he sees her cry. He cries at her crying. That was his love for Sayyidina Hamza. And you see the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, that he says, he started by telling her about her brother, and then her uncle, and then her husband. The husband has a special place like nobody else, even though they're all close to her. Subhanallah. So, the incredible life of Sayyidina Hamza is something that, subhanallah, of Sayyidina Mus'ab, Ibn Omair, so many lessons to take from his life. One of the interesting things that the ulama, they mentioned about some similarities between Sayyidina Mus'ab and some of the other people that she shared a couple of things with. So remember I told you the first two people to come to Medina to be ambassadors were Mus'ab ibn Omair and then Abdullah ibn Maktoum. They're the first to be sent to Medina. They were, interestingly enough, they were both killed while carrying the flag in different battles. They have that shared reality. Another interesting similarity is that Mus'ab, he was by his da'wah, Medina is opened up. Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was the chief da'i in Habasha. He was responsible for the Muslims in Habasha. So Ja'far in Habasha and Mus'ab in Medina. Both of them had both of their arms cut off in battle. Sayyidina Mus'ab in Uhud and Sayyidina Ja'far in Mu'tah. And then another interesting similarity. Sayyidina Mus'ab and Sayyidina Hamza, the two most prominent Sahaba that died, shaheed in Uhud. Medina was opened up by Mus'ab. In some sense, Mecca was opened up by Sayyidina Hamza, meaning when Hamza and then Omar, they became Muslim, Islam went public, right? And so both of them, those two, so some interesting similarities that subhanAllah we should also find here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to meet Sayyidina Mus'ab and to hear from him riwayah, narration about the Prophet ﷺ. I was with the Prophet ﷺ and he did this, because we didn't hear it in the books of Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi and so on, because he gave his life and he didn't reach in a stage or an age where he was able to convey that information to us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be able to be in the presence of Sayyidina Mus'ab in Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to carry the love of this deen the way Sayyidina Mus'ab carried it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the dunya in our hands and not in our hearts the way it was for Sayyidina Mus'ab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teach us that which benefits us and benefit from what we learn. May He increase us in knowledge and good deeds. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا صالحا يا رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Do you have any questions or no?
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Grave, Shahada grave of the Shaheed, is that in Mecca or Medina?
Of the Shuhada?
Yeah.
On the outskirts of Medina.
Oh,
The graves of the Shuhada of Uhud. Uhud took place right outside of Medina. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you the ability to visit and see with your own eyes.
I visited the grave of Khadija radiallahu anha in Mecca.
MashaAllah.
That one's in Mecca.
That's in Mecca.
That's, yeah.
She never made Hijrah, right? She died before the Hijrah.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, all the battles were fought, in Medina or the outskirts of Medina, or closer to Medina than Mecca. In other words, Badr is some distance away, but it's closer to Medina than Mecca.
Is it the same Jannat al-Baqi area or?
No, it's a different area, Medina. It's on the outskirts of Medina. It was outside. There's a whole dialogue, There was the Prophet ﷺ said, let's stay in Medina and fight. Some of the Sahaba who missed Badr, they wanted to stay, got excited. They said, no, let's go and fight them. Go meet them. So that's why. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he put on his armor to fight, and then they felt bad because the Prophet wanted to stay. They said, no, Ya Rasulullah, we should fight in Medina, because they felt bad. They were contradicting the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, once the Prophet puts on his armor, then the issue is settled. So that's why they went outside of Medina.